following the pack, all swallowed in their coats, with scarves of red tied round their throats, to keep their little heads from falling in the snow. And I turn round and there you go, and Michael, you would fall and turn the white.
In 1981, Ms. Kennedy started working for human rights. 1988, she founded the Robert Kennedy Center for Human Rights. She's the daughter of Robert Kennedy, who was a senator who tried running for president, but sadly got assassinated. So I'll leave the word to Ms. Kennedy, who will start talking to.
I'm so happy to be here today. I started working, well, let me just say, when I was a child, my father was the Attorney General of the United States, and it was the height of the Civil Rights Movement. So my father realized he wouldn't be successful unless he partnered with the civil rights organizers on the ground. So today, what we do is we identify people who are the Martin Luther Kings of their countries, the Mahatma Gandhis and the Martin Luther Kings of their countries. Usually people who have faced imprisonment or torture or been threatened with death for their work. And these are two of those people, GABOR GOMBOS and Stephen Bradberry. Gombos is also here. GABOR is the leading expert on the world for people with mental disabilities. And so I'll talk a little bit more about him. Stephen Bradberry won the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. It was presented by Barack Obama. Who's heard of Barack Obama? Great. Okay, now you should know Stephen Bradberry because Stephen is one of Barack Obama's heroes. I spent about 2.5 years, and I traveled around the world, and I interviewed human rights defenders like these two gentlemen and His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Elie Wiesel and others, some well-known, some not so well-known, about why they do this work. Where does courage come from? What does it mean to be a human rights activist?
I was involved in one country for a while, and then I was the director of Latin America for all the countries in the Peace Corps. And after about 4 years of that, which I spent most of my time training young Americans to be community organizers. That's what I thought would be the best thing for young Americans to do in Latin America. India, Africa, Asia, maybe they have different needs, but what was vitally needed in Latin America was community organization because it had really a feudal system. If I'm a farmer or the way it was in Latin America, and I owned a large piece of land and I wanted to acquire another piece of land, I would do so and I'd buy it, and along with it I'd buy the people who worked on that land. Now that may seem strange, but that's the way the system worked.
Let me ask you this. Who are some of your human rights heroes? Yeah.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Mahatma Gandhi, that's a good one. Others?
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela. Others? Yep. Martin Luther King.
Mankiewicz Masai.
I'm so happy to have a woman in the room. Thank you. we needed that. Yeah.
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks, another one.
I think we covered within 1 minute a lot of essential skills. These are the skills which human rights defenders, I would say human beings, need if we want to have a dignified life. But you missed one, which in my personal experience is the essential element, and that is the sense of humor. When Kerry approached me and invited me to be one of the human rights defenders in the Speak Truth to Power project, I was just in a very difficult personal life situation. My wife and I wanted to adopt 2 wonderful Roma kids who were in state custody. Both my wife and I live with a diagnosis of severe mental illness. So when we started the bureaucratic process of becoming eligible to adopt children, we were immediately disqualified. Mad people? Nuts? How could they raise children? It's a responsibility. Mad people are not able to do that. But my wife is also a human rights defender, and we were fighting. And we succeeded in the paper. Only in paper. The story is long. The outcome was that the brothers spent almost a year with us. And then we had to say goodbye to them. And they were sent back to their orphanages. And all communication was cut between us and them. And this was a few weeks before the big Washington, D.C. celebration of Speak Truth to Power happened in the autumn of 2000. I didn't feel safe to travel. But of course, I wanted to be part of that celebration because it doesn't happen every day, unfortunately. So what I did was that I went to the outpatient psychiatric clinic where I had long reports with very bad diagnosis and other things. I hadn't been there for about 10 years, but the documentation about me was there. So I went there and wanted to ask the psychiatrist to prescribe me some anti-anxiety drug to help me cope with this travel and celebration of human rights and meeting President Clinton in a relatively easy manner without ending up in a psychiatric hospital in Washington, D.C., which I guess is not a very nice experience either. So I went to the psychiatrist and asked her to prescribe this medication. She asked me that why did I need this, and I didn't want to waste too much time, so I focused on the core of the travel, and I told her that I am to travel to Washington. Why are you to travel to Washington? Because, to explain what Speak Truth to Power is in 1 minute, impossible. At that time I could not do that. Now I could. I simply told her that, I am to meet President Clinton. She had my documentation before her. She knew what my diagnosis was, and she made a prescription. I went to the pharmacy, and before actually I gave the prescription to the chemist, I read it, and it was one of those very strong drugs which are given to people who are acutely mad. Which I was not, but the psychiatrist was convinced that if somebody has a severe mental illness and says that he is to meet President Clinton, then it is the case of acute madness. Now, I must tell you that at that time I could not laugh. Now I can, and next time in my life, if I will face a similar situation, I do hope that I will be able to laugh immediately. I spoke with some of my heroes, and many of them shared that from time to time we find ourselves in really bad situation. No light, absolute darkness, and you do not even know if it is a finite tunnel or an infinite one. If there is a stage where there can be a light at the end of the tunnel or not. What can help you survive this? I think that if you have a sense of humor, it helps you a lot. So I encourage all of you, those of you who have an ambition to become a human rights defender, to work on your sense of humor.
Okay, what is bravery? Yeah?
Oh, maybe like accepting risks.
Between bravery and courage, as far as I can see, is that you're overcoming that fear not to do something for yourself, but to do something for a wider community. It could be for your football team, or it could be for civil rights in your community. But it has to be not for your own self, but for the community. That's the difference between bravery and courage. And who here has done something brave in your life? That's good. It's interesting. I talk about this a lot, and this is a very forthcoming class, because mostly people say no. But that's good. So have you ever stood up and taken the blame when you knew you could have been silent? You could have been silent and your sibling is getting blamed, but you stand up and say to your parent, oh, that's not quite how it happened. Are there other examples of things that you've done on human rights or community service in this school? Yeah?
I was with refugees in South Africa, and I actually did some human rights like law work, and I also worked with juvenile delinquents. We did a workshop about community and their future, and it was the best experience of my life. I really, really enjoyed it.
The whole thing around being a human rights defender for me was an interesting journey because I never considered myself someone who worked on human rights. As Kerry said, I'm a community organizer by trade, which means, as was said, basically that I work with, in my case, low-income families in the New Orleans area, just to help them to get the things that everybody expects that they should have in their communities for their neighborhoods. And so when the Hurricane Katrina came and swept through, I was actually in Denver, Colorado at the time at a meeting. And actually on the way over here, I realized that this was actually the point where I actually won the award, even though it wasn't the action, but it was a decision that set everything off. My father called my parents to let them know that I was okay, that I had not been caught in a storm. And my father said, you know, you can come home if you want to, because they're in Chicago, where I was born and raised. And my father's a gadget freak, and so he has a great big television, and his remote control at that time was one that took 2 hands to operate and had so many buttons. And he said, you know, you can come home if you want. And I remember the thought flashing through my head that I would be sitting on the sofa, flashing through the television. And I said, no, I think I'm going to head back down and go to work. And it was that decision that led to the series of events that brought me to the attention of the RFK Center. And I brought up that situation because I think in most of the cases, and I've had a good opportunity to meet many of the defenders and several of my fellow laureates, and we're all regular people, right? I don't think anyone would consider themselves to be extraordinary, except that we found ourselves in extraordinary circumstances, and at that time made the decision to act in the interest of others ahead of our own self-interest. And that really is, I think, the key to whatever it is you want to do. If you want to be considered great instead of just good, is to look at how is it that you can use your gifts and talents to benefit others beyond your own, before and beyond your own self-interest. In talking to people, you do want to identify what an issue is and help them to appreciate what it is. And then we don't have time to get into it, but really, what are the reasons why you can't have the Uggs in this case?
What they have done is they've said something very important, and I don't know if they've realised that they can understand something with a logical reasoning. Mm-hmm. But
wait a minute. Can you stand this way? Because telling me doesn't help.
One thing you have said, Lara, our great debater, is that perhaps we're communicating with you about uniform in the wrong way. Is that what you're trying to tell us? And you're saying that you can understand a logical rule, but you can't see logics behind some of the rules of our community. That's what so you're really telling us that you want us to try and communicate with you in a different way.
Okay. So here, let me wait. Because I don't want to go through the whole Uggs debate. But I do want to point out something that's important. In that, just in going through this process, there seems to be a little bit more of an ear around the UGG situation, which is actually very, very key and very important in terms of how you move on issues that you have. Because really, the UGGs are not important, right? And whether or not you get to wear UGGs with your uniform or not won't make a big change in much of anything except for your foot comfort and your sense of personal style. But what is, I think, more important is that if you want to take from this, is that the ability to have a conversation that causes a member of the administration to say, well, maybe we're not having the discussion in the right way, is actually a big win. And were we dealing with something such as your ability to come back home, or any number of things that go on in communities, that would be considered a big victory to move someone from a point of absolute no to a point of willing to have a conversation. Because if you can't even have the conversation, then getting the UGGs will never even happen, right? And I'll tell you, I don't like UGGs.
And he was talking about on the pyramids in Giza in Egypt, which were built by slaves 2,000 years ago. There's ancient graffiti, and it says, no one was angry enough to speak out. And I think that what Digna is saying is we've got to be angry enough to speak out when we see injustice. And that doesn't mean rage. That means outrage. That means I will not accept this, and I'm going to create change.